So I am convinced that Monster Hunter 6 is just around the corner, and before anything is officially revealed, I want to share with you my predictions for what it's going to look like. So this video is a little bit rough, but I want to use it as a time capsule to kind of put these out there, and then in 1 month, hopefully, I can come back, see what's true, see how close I was. I can pretend I'm smart if I get some stuff right. If not, I can just have a laugh and you can laugh at me too. So one thing I should say is that this is not a wish list of my personal wants or desires for the game. It is me trying to earnestly predict what is going to be the case based on rough evidence in some cases, and other cases just complete gut feeling. So yeah, we're going to jump straight into it. So I think it's going to be announced next month at the Tokyo Game Show, and I think it's going to release in March 2024. So if we step back for a moment, Monster Hunter World was announced at E3 2017, which was in July, and then it was released in January 2018. So a gap of 6 months to do marketing, final tweaks, all that kind of thing. If it's announced at the Tokyo Game Show, releases in March, that's also roughly about 6 months, so a similar kind of marketing period. There was also recently this snippet from Takashi Mochizuki, who's a reporter for Bloomberg, where he said that Capcom plans to release one unannounced game which would sell millions by March next year. I think that there's only a few IPs that Capcom could confidently say would sell 1 million, those being Street Fighter, Resident Evil and Monster Hunter, and well, we've just had Street Fighter 6. I think a new Resident Evil is unlikely, so the strongest candidate in this case is a new Monster Hunter game. I'm also fairly confident that it is going to be in the month of March itself, and most likely mid-March. And the reason for that is that March 31st is the end of Capcom's financial year. If we take a look back at Monster Hunter Rise for a moment, it was released on March 26th, so just 5 days before their end of year. And it released in a very strange state where it didn't have its ending. And this was blamed on delays from COVID. It came quickly enough, but still it could have just done with a few more weeks delay and it would have been a complete finished product. But nonetheless, they rushed it out before the end of March. And my personal theory is that there's some kind of incentive to get the sales in before the end of financial year. But based on past behavior, I think this is a strong possibility. Okay, so next, I think that in gameplay style and general vibe, it's going to be very, very close to Monster Hunter World. You know, since Tri, there's been a big gimmick, let's say, with each new game. So Monster Hunter Tri had swimming, Monster Hunter 4 had verticality, World was a complete redo, Rise had wire bugs, and I don't think there's going to be a big new one in this kind of vein for Monster Hunter 6. Aside from one point which I'll cover later, but yeah, nothing brand new that redefines the identity completely. And the reason for that is they're onto a good thing, and I really don't think that they're going to want to mess with that. Monster Hunter World was their best-selling game of all time, not just in the Monster Hunter series, but across all of Capcom's IPs, which is insane. I really think that they're going to look at that and realize they have lightning captured in a bottle. They're not going to want to mess with that too much. And in that vein, I think the name of the game is going to be as close to being called Monster Hunter World 2 as they can reasonably get. I think that there's going to be some guy in the sales department who is crying himself to sleep that they're not allowed to call it Monster Hunter World 2 because, you know, best-selling game, they're going to want to recapture that audience again. I would imagine that they want to make it clear that this is not a sequel to Rise, this is not in that spiritual vein, this is really the sequel to Monster Hunter World. So with that in mind, I think it's going to be called something along the lines of Monster Hunter Utopia, Monster Hunter Universe, you know, something along the lines of World, but bigger, but the next step, maybe Monster Hunter Eden. A while back there was a fake leak that the next game was going to be called Monster Hunter Paradise, and I think that's a really good name as well. If it turns out to be true, that would be pretty funny, but something along those lines, a synonym for World, basically. And it's in that framework that I make a lot of these next predictions. So I think it's not going to be anything too absurdly different. I think it's going to be building upon World, tweaking what World did, instead of completely starting from scratch again. And so I think they'll be looking at adding variety to that World formula. And I think a very easy way they could do that is to introduce a new weapon. And I'm going to go one step further and say it's going to be a ranged melee hybrid. We haven't had any new weapons since Monster Hunter 4. World obviously gave a refresh to every single one, which made them feel a lot like new weapons. But I think in the mindset of building on World without changing too much, a new weapon would be a very good way to bring something fresh. And I say ranged melee hybrid because in general, I think ranged weapons have been pretty neglected as the years have gone by. There's only 3 ranged weapons in the game. I think a 4th one that would be used entirely at range is unlikely because they already have the bases covered really. You have a bow, you have heavy bowgun, light bowgun. I'm not too sure what you could do purely ranged, but a hybrid I think would be a good way to bridge the gap between a lot of the players who play exclusively melee while also giving something new to the people who really enjoy ranged. And I think it would probably work similar to the charge blade, where you gather up charge through one mode of attack, you switch to the other one, and it's powered up by your actions in the previous state. I think it makes most sense that attacking at range is how you gather the charge, and then you kind of go in to really get into melee range, deal big damage, then retreat back. You're dealing smaller attacks at range, but you're building that charge to go back in again. I think that would be quite an interesting loop. It promotes a bit of dynamic gameplay. You're not always running away, keeping a distance, which is my personal problem with ranged. I find that not as interesting. Yeah, I think that would be a dynamic, fun weapon to play with, and introducing a new weapon, a good way to make people feel like there's something new going on in this game. Next up, with this framework still in mind, I think that there's going to be a refresh of the weather system and that it's going to have quite a lot of impact on the hunts themselves. So World was really based around this kind of living ecosystem. They wanted you to feel like this was a real place that you were walking through, fighting in, and I think weather effects would be a very, very easy way to enhance that kind of feeling. So perhaps if a storm rolls in, it's windy, it's rainy, monsters can't fly as well perhaps. Their fire attacks are weakened, maybe they retreat to caves to shelter, something like that. Just something to add a bit of dynamism to the world itself. And this runs a very fine line between being a fun addition and being really, really annoying. You know, no one wants to wade through snow that slows your character or be buffeted by winds all the time. I think people are fed up with Kushala already with that. I don't need it on all the other monsters. So I think they're probably going to make a big play of this in the marketing, but in the game, it's not going to have as much of an effect as you might fear. I think that they're going to be very aware that this is a fine line. I think they're going to take a lot of care with it. I think this is a very easy way to put something into the game that feels like it has a real big impact, but is actually fairly easy to implement. So I think that is going to make it very attractive during the development cycle. Okay, on to probably the biggest one and probably the most controversial prediction that I'm going to make, which is that underwater combat is going to return. Now, my logical side says, you know, there's no way, there's no chance. People really don't like it. It's so much work. It's so annoying. No, but there is one interview that changed my mind. I'll link it in the description, and it was Yuya Tokita, who is the director of Monster Hunter World, talking about the game's development, all this kind of thing. And he just straight up said that underwater combat was supposed to be in Monster Hunter World, and they wanted it in the Wildspire Waste, but it would have taken too much effort, and they wouldn't have met the deadline, so they scrapped it. And I was pretty shocked when I read this, but there you go, the director of Monster Hunter World saying that he wanted underwater combat in that game. So in my little framework of Monster Hunter 6 being Monster Hunter World, but bigger, but better, I think underwater combat would be a really, really good way of adding something new, adding something fresh to that existing formula. I know that a lot of people might feel a little bit concerned about that, but I really think that they will have learned from their mistakes. They're not going to risk putting something in that turns off loads of players. They'll take care to make it interesting. I would say if you are a bit worried about that, keep an open mind. But we'll see. Perhaps the riskiest prediction I'll make, but I'm going to stick with it. I think that underwater combat is going to return. Okay, next up, I think that the mounting system is going to be completely refreshed again. So the mounting system was introduced in Monster Hunter 4, it was refreshed in World, it was changed again in Rise, and I also kind of think that the Clutch Claw was a little bit of an experiment to see how they could play with, you know, players actually interacting with the bodies of the monsters, climbing on them, attaching to them, and I still don't think that they're happy. I still don't think it's in a great place, and I really think that they're going to refresh it again. I think the initial problem was that it was a very simple system. You would jump on, you would hold when they roared or moved around, and then just mash buttons to get the bar up, and then once it was full, they would get a knockdown. It's very simple. World made it a bit more interactive, where you could jump around to different body parts and all this. And then Sunbreak obviously changed it completely by having you take control and puppet them when you mount. And I don't think that the wire bugs are going to return. I think it's going to be similar to World's system, but I still think that there's room for improvement there. When you play in co-op, it's very non-interactive. You know, somebody jumps on, you kind of just twiddle your thumbs until they get knocked down or they get knocked off, and then you can go in. It's a good opportunity to sharpen, to heal up, that kind of thing. But from a designer perspective, you want these hunts to feel really interactive. When someone jumps on, the hunt just kind of stops abruptly for a few seconds. And it's not a huge deal, but I really think that they're going to want to improve it. So what do I think that's going to look like? Well, I don't think the clutch claw is going to return, but I think that idea of being able to attach and jump on from static is going to be how the mounting system has changed. So if you've played Dragon's Dogma, you know that there's a dedicated jump and a dedicated grab button, and by that means you can jump on wherever you want, you can climb around, attack whichever weak point that you want to. I don't think it's going to go that far, but I do think that it's going to be in that vein. So what I can see being quite likely is perhaps a certain move at the end of combos, or perhaps some kind of prompt that you can press where at the end of a combo you can automatically launch and attach to whichever part that you have been targeting. And once attached, you can move around, perhaps not freely like Dragon's Dogma, perhaps more like World style, where you jump from designated part to designated part. And while you're attached, I think that the monster will try and shake you off occasionally, but will also carry on attacking other players as usual. So this would solve the interactivity problem where the other players would still actually be fighting the monster while you're attached. It would make it a little bit more interactive for the player themselves who does attach, in that you could target where you wanted to jump on. Perhaps that you don't need to jump on to get a mount knockdown each time. Perhaps there would be different things that you could do, damage a certain weak point, a bit like the Clutch Claw weaken or send them flying in a certain direction. But yeah, something along those lines. But I think that it's definitely going to be refreshed, and that's my prediction of how it's going to look like. Okay, so now I've got a few quickfire ones before another big one. First of all, I think it's going to be cross-play, probably not cross-save. Street Fighter 6, which came out recently, has cross-play, does not have cross-save. They were quite open about their struggles with implementing cross-save for Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but some kind of difficulty seems to be happening with cross-save. As much as people want it, I'm going to say no, but I think cross-play is a given. Next, I think it's going to be on the RE engine. Rise was RE engine, World was the old MT framework engine. I'm by no means an engine expert, but as I understand it, RE engine is easy to work with, easy to scale, it's very well optimized. So I think that's a good thing, and that's it. Next, I think that there's going to be more than 3 large monsters on the map at any one time, and linked with that, I think the maps are going to be bigger than World. I think that this is just a very easy way to make things feel bigger, more special, more lived in. I'd be very surprised if that's not the case. Okay, so on to my final prediction, which is going to be how the reveal trailer is going to work. Now, you know, I have very, very low chances of getting this right, but I want to give it a go anyway, just in case it works out. So looking back at Monster Hunter World's trailer, they really concentrate on new mechanics. So you get to see how detailed the world is, you see the slinger, you see hiding in bushes, you see the mantle, tracking, the new mounting system, you even see an SOS flare at the end. And I think that the new trailer would be following in that same vein. So based on what I've said, I think it's going to begin a little bit like Monster Hunter Worlds did, where it's just your hunter exploring the world. You get to see, you know, oh, wow, these new graphics, look how detailed it is, just to kind of, wow you to begin with. I think that we're going to see a new monster, sort of in the vein of Anjanath, where it's not the flagship, but it becomes kind of iconic in its own way. I don't think that they would be using this new weapon I've described off the bat. I think it's probably just going to be the traditional greatsword again. And after a little bit of back and forth, I think that we would see this new mounting system in action. So perhaps at the end of a combo, the hunter's launched, attaches on, climbs around a little bit, and you know, you get to see how it works a little bit like that. Then I think that this monster is either going to take off into the air if it has wings, or run around, run to leave. The hunter's still attached, they're kind of holding on, you know, and then it's either going to dive into the water if it's on land, or the hunter's going to fall off into some water, and then you're going to be like, oh, that's the underwater reveal, you know. So they're swimming around underwater, and then from, you know, the corner, who's going to turn up? It's Legaigris. and I feel very confident that Legaicrus is going to be in it regardless of if underwater combat returns or not. And the reason for that is it's sort of second series flagship after Rathalos, I would say. Not sure if that's just my personal preference bleeding through a bit too much, but I do think it's an iconic returning monster that would get a lot of people excited. And actually in the prototype for Monster Hunter World, Legaicrus was just straight up in it. So Anjanath was knocked down onto a cliff, and then Legaicrus popped up and thrashed him around a bit. It ended with the hunter kind of squaring up to Legaicrus, and obviously didn't make it into World in the end. I think it was a problem with the Leviathan skeleton, which they've since fixed in Monster Hunter Rise. And I think Legaicrus appearing in this new trailer would make sense with this in mind. It's a realization of that original vision. It's a way to say, look how far we've come. I think it would make a lot of sense. And I think that in that moment, when the hunter's squaring up to face this Legaicrus underwater, we would see a little bit of the multiplayer co-op. So perhaps people were already hunting the Legaicrus, or they come in from the sides. And I think maybe then one of them might be using the new weapon, or they might save that till a later date to kind of generate hype more. Actually, I'm going to take that back. They're not going to show the new weapon in this first trailer. That's going to be in the second trailer that we get. That's my prediction. Okay, so this is it. This is my bingo card that I will be taking to the Tokyo Game Show. I'd be very curious to hear if you agree with any of these, if you think they're just complete bullshit. If you have any predictions of your own, please leave them below. Would love to hear it. So I'll be coming back to this video to check at the end of September. Fingers crossed at least the reveal prediction turns out to be true. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.